after Genomania, we do get kind of 2 back-to-back matches that go to a time a little bit before that. Not too long. We're not going back to freaking, George Hackenschmidt here, but we're going back a few years. And it's really a nice kind of homage to Bruno and everything that he's done, but really one of his greatest feuds, and that's with his pupil turned dastardly evil man, Larry Zbyszko. And I love me some Larry. Larry Legend's pretty awesome. But Bruno and Larry, so we get 2 matches there to end the show. But so far, before we get into the Bruno matches, what were your thoughts on kind of up until then? Was this a pretty damn good representation of the WWF product at the time and kind of what they wanted to convey to the masses?
Yeah, I think they hit dead on here what they missed on Bloopers, Bleeps, and Body Slams. That was just a mess of all kinds of things going on, and this really hit, Hogan, Andre, Snuka, Richter, Lopper, you got everybody in there they were trying to showcase. Up to this point, I don't know where the Bruno stuff really plays in. It should have probably played in the middle of the tape, maybe, if they wanted to say, let's go back in time a little bit and then come back to the current and close out strong. But, they were still figuring things out. Obviously, this was only the 3rd tape, and we're really not sure which tapes were produced in what order of these first 3. So,
yeah, I get that maybe if you're thinking in 1985 when this is released, how can you have a best of WWF without Bruno Sammartino, right? But then part of you now looking back is probably knowing how many other Coliseum videos they had, this feud and these matches might have fit better on another tape or buried kind of in the middle a little bit. Because I get it. I mean, it's Bruno. None of this would have been possible without Bruno. He's one of the greatest champions of all time and synonymous with wrestling, especially in the Northeast. But yeah, when you're thinking about the best of the WWF and you want to move the business forward, you want to focus on Hogan and Piper and Snuka and Cyndi Lauper and Wendy Richter and Big John Studd and Andre. Bruno's time kind of had passed at that point to being, he wasn't on the cover for a reason, though his name was. So I get it. I mean, I guess they got to throw it in there, but it does feel a little awkward. It's almost like we were watching a tape and then it ended, and then we got these kind of 2 bonus matches from the archives.
Yeah, I think Vince probably wanted to get a lot of Bruno on there just based on the fact that other videos, Bruno had his own Coliseum video later on in the series, and he was featured heavily throughout the other one. So I think Vince is just a big Bruno fan, even though they had their major differences over the years. I think he really just was probably a fan since Bruno's era was when Vince was growing up. So he probably just wanted to get him on there, but they just hadn't perfected, placement quite yet on these videos.
So that takes us to Agricultural Hall in Allentown, Pennsylvania in early 1980, end of January, actually. And we get Larry Zbyszko against Bruno. So for those that might not know, I don't know, there's probably like 3 of you out there in the world. Larry Zbyszko, was the star pupil of Bruno Sammartino, representing Pittsburgh, PA there. And this match was great because this is just part of the larger narrative of Larry and Bruno. But I love this match. I think it is one of those great story matches, right? Where not storytelling, but like it pushes the greater story angle along, right? And I thought it was great. Bruno keeps releasing the holds, and he's not going to punish Larry Zbyszko and get the submission win. He keeps releasing him. And Larry eventually cheap shots him and just goes crazy and busts Bruno open with a chair. And first off, come on, cameraman. Like, I know Bruno probably should have hidden the blade job a little bit better, but like you get like zoomed in on it. I mean, even a 5-year-old could see like he's taking there and just slicing himself up open. So damn you, cameraman. But overall, I thought it was a great, like, integral part of the Bruno-Larry narrative, this match. And I had really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, maybe they were looking for the view of this was one of the best stories that the WWF had produced. So maybe that's what they were looking at when they wanted to get something like this on the tape.
I mean, other than Hogan Piper, I mean, it'd be hard to find a better true rivalry that's just like is like visceral and like so emotionally charged. Yeah, 100%. And I'm glad I'm not mad they put it on there. I mean, I enjoyed the matches. It's just thinking about it as a whole, like, did it fit? Is there a better fit? Maybe.
It's amazing to look back. I don't know if you ever listened to Larry Zbyszko's Hall of Fame speech from a few years ago, but hearing him tell the story of actually being trained by Bruno and all that being true, what he had to go through to get in contact with Bruno and everything. And a lot of that whole thing was just such a natural story. It wasn't anything anybody had to come up with. It was just playing off real life.
And that usually makes the best storylines, and believability is not an issue there. You know, Larry made a career off this. I mean, this catapulted him to the moon, and he had an amazing Hall of Fame career. And of course, Bruno was already well entrenched in Hall of Famedom. At least I know it took him a while to get in there, but he was one of the greatest wrestlers of all time at that point already. So after this match, we get a weigh-in. So we get, and Bruno on the mic, not a lot here. I mean, it just, I was waiting for like the punchline to come, and it just was kind of a weigh-in. Mm-hmm. And that just leads us to the big match. Well, the weigh-in was for the big match at Shea Stadium in the cage in front of 50,000 screaming Bruno fans.
Yeah, this was a huge event. I mean, of course, they kind of changed their history a little bit and didn't want to bring up certain things. But the fact that Hulk and Andre was on this show too, I believe, if I'm thinking about the same Shea Stadium show.
The showdown at Shea?
Yeah, I mean, that's the same one, I think.
In 1980, right?
Yes, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure Hulk and Andre was the undercard. But they kind of erased that from history, because when Vince took over, I think he just kind of rewrote history how he wanted and left certain things out, because in this narrative, Hulk and Andre were just best friends forever. Hulk was never in WWF before this. Both guys had never been defeated, so on and so on. But it's amazing to think that Bruno was really on top of these major stadium cards before Hulk and Andre's big run.
So you want to hear some of the matches on this card?
Sure.
So you could argue Bruno might be like, in the history of wrestling, might only be like the fourth biggest and most influential person in the history of wrestling on this card. Because not only do you have Andre and Hulk Hogan right before that, and Andre wins in 7 minutes and 48 seconds. You have Rene Goulet. I'm joking. You do have Rene Goulet, but he's not the guy. But you also have, in the fourth match, Larry Sharp, the trainer, gets defeated by the NWF heavyweight champion, Antonio Inoki.
Wow.
You also have Tatsumi Fujinami against Chavo Guerrero for the WWF Junior Heavyweight Championship. You have Dominic DiNucci and Baron Mikel Cicluna. You have Bob Backlund and Pedro Morales against the Wild Samoans in a 2 out of 3 falls match for the world title. And it went only 2 falls, which never happens. You always get the third fall.
Is that when Backlund and Morales won the tag titles?
I don't know.
I seem to remember them winning the belts, but having to give them up because they were already champions, so they couldn't hold 2 titles at once, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, there might be something to that.
Maybe so. You have Tony Atlas defeating Ken Patera by countout for the Intercontinental title, so he obviously doesn't win. You have Ivan Putski in the card. You have the fabulous Moolah. You have Pat Patterson. You have Rene Goulet. You have a pretty damn good lineup there. I mean, 13 matches. I mean, hey, it drew almost 40,000 people.
And most of that was drawn by Bruno and Larry Zbyszko's feud.
Oh, yeah.
Because they had already done a few matches around the different arenas and couldn't come to a conclusive finish, so got to bring it to a stadium and a cage.
Okay, so the showdown at Shea in 1976, 4 years earlier, you had Inoki and Ali being shown to the stadium via closed circuit television from Tokyo.
Right.
Yes. And then you had Bruno in his return match against Hansen. That was for the WWF World title. Right. You also had another boxer-wrestler match, this one in person, with Andre against Chuck Wepner. And then before that, you just, you had your usual suspects of that time, like Chief Jay Strongbow, and you had Putski and Cicluna and all those guys. So pretty cool stuff. I mean, that was pretty big. Also drew about 30,000. But I think I would rather see the 1980 one. A little bit more variety there.
What a time to be a wrestling fan, even in 1976, when you could go to a stadium to watch a show like that and see an international sports event, which was Inoki and Ali on a big screen, and still get a live show as well. That was just a totally different era in life to be able to go to something like that, I'm sure.
100%. But back to this match in the cage, Bruno and Larry. I mean, the crowd's loving it. Dude, Larry is a bumping machine. Bruno dominates most of this match. I mean, this is a Bruno showcase. Bruno does have like a little bit of a bloodied arm there from the match, but Larry's a bumping machine. A little bit. Now, I don't know, maybe this wasn't supposed to happen, but it looked like the finish, Larry was supposed to get caught in the ropes and kind of stuck there where he couldn't move. When he gets thrown in there, like it looks like he's trying to get his body wrapped in the ropes, and so he's stuck so Bruno can walk out, because it comes across as a bit of an anticlimactic finish where it's like there's not the big dramatic where Bruno walks out and Larry's really just trying to hold him and there's a big move. It's a little bit of, he just walks out kind of, and Larry's just a little bit sitting there. So the finish was a little odd, but the match itself was okay, but the crowd absolutely dug it.
Yeah, I think this was similar to most of Bruno's matches in the Garden and probably everywhere else, where he'd wrestle a heel in a match. They'd have an indecisive finish, come back for a rematch, probably another indecisive finish. And then the third match, the payoff, would be the cage match, and the fans would just pay to come see the heel get their ass kicked. And that's exactly what they got here, probably on the next level, because Zbyszko had done such a big turn and had betrayed Bruno, and it was such a story. So there was even more of that element there. That's why they could hold this in the stadium instead of just the Garden. But pretty much the fans got what they wanted to see here, which was Bruno getting his revenge.
Absolutely. It was the right match, the right time, in the right place, the right venue. Everything worked in that regard. The match itself was punching and kicking and a cage match stuff. There wasn't much here outside of that. And I think this was one that might have benefited from the clipping. I think that there was probably, my assumption is the match went longer than what was aired. And the editing is odd, though. There are some like kind of choppy edits, but I bet you it was just a lot of like punching and kicking and things like that. And that, you kind of get the point.
Pretty much typical Bruno.
Yeah, but did you notice the miscommunication at the end where Larry tries to go and like raise his hand at the end, like fine, you won, you beat me, and like walk off and up, and like Bruno's having none of it and like punches him in the face?
Yeah.
I think Bruno's just like was so fired up and had that Italian blood boiling that he was like, screw you, man. But that looked like it was an odd thing. But Larry still raised his hand and just like walks off. It was kind of crazy. Almost better that there was the miscommunication.
Such a different era. You just don't know how things worked back then. Like, was those sort of things talked about, or could you do something like that on the fly? Or maybe they didn't agree. Bruno didn't want to, forgive him or whatever, quote unquote. Hard to tell in that era, but it was definitely just more of a free for all. He made you think, because you couldn't tell what was going on really, so it made you really think about it. And I don't know if Larry, we'd have to research again. I don't know if he stuck around WWF much more after this. I know he never returned all those years, a little bit after this feud, but I'm not sure how much longer he stuck around.
Yeah, and there are guys that carried their grudge in and outside the ring. I heard on the podcast the other day with John Arezzi, famed wrestler and wrestling historian. And I guess he wasn't probably a famed wrestler, but ran popular radio shows during the 80s and 90s and such. But he also was big in really kind of starting the convention movement in wrestling. And he talked about getting Bruno and Larry at the convention. And like he said, like they wouldn't sit next to each other and talk to each other. And they really lived that Larry-Bruno feud for many, many, many years. And I don't know. It's fascinating. Bruno and Larry are great. I mean, it's great. Their feud, anything that they do was wonderful. And over time, I've appreciated Larry Zbyszko even more, watching his stuff, even later stuff. He's great, but he is a bumping fool that needs to get a little bit more credit from the modern fan, because he was awesome.
Yeah, I think Bruno was like that with most of his opponents over the years. If you got a picture of him with him and Buddy Rogers, I think there might be a couple out there. It was like, whoa, and they don't look happy either, posing together. Mm. But I think that just made these feuds magic, and they weren't just going to forget about it and say, oh, that was a good time. They kept it going, until their older years. And that's why a lot of these things are still so cool.